So the agenda today, I want to talk about governance. What is it? What are people doing with it? What do people want to do with it? I need to recap Nintex workflow and reporting because we're going to be talking about those in addition to how we're going to address governance. And then I'm going to show 3 specific demos running off of our portal here at Eastridge. So what is SharePoint governance? Is it reporting? Is it workflow, compliance, security, or is it just checking the database to make sure you're not running out of disk space and monitoring those things? Well, it's all of those. All of that makes up governance in some way, and for each company it's going to be different. In the past, what it involved was kind of a manual hodgepodge of checking reports for server health or site utilization, or running reports specific for user trends. What was the most popular site, or which sites are abandoned and not being used anymore, just sitting out there taking up space. There's also concerns around provisioning and security. Who's opened up a lot of documents that they shouldn't be opening up, or an unusual amount of downloading, or doing audits around what's the history of a document and who had access to it over time, depending on the nature of the business. What we're seeing today is there's a lot of tools now that let us link all these things together to do these things automatically. In the past, Eastridge, we were engaged by customers to come in and do things called health checks. And that's essentially sitting down and drilling through the infrastructure, running a lot of reports, compiling a management report, and presenting it to the customer every quarter. Don't really need to do that anymore. Now we can set this up automatically to let customers take action as these events occur. So let me take a moment to talk about build versus buy, just in the spirit of full disclosure. Eastridge Technology is a services company. We have been since we started in 1998. The majority of our revenue comes from the customization of Microsoft-based server software. So a legitimate question is, why are you guys advocating tools like Nintex and AvePoint and Knowledge Lake, all these other things, and when you could build these things from scratch? Well, there's a lot of reasons. First of all, we've been there and done that. When we started the company, we did everything custom. Workflows, EDI integration, mobility, you name it. The problem is it takes a long time, it's expensive, and the results aren't always perfect. We don't write perfect code. I don't know if anybody writes perfect code, and customers don't always have perfect specifications. So all the way around, there's a lot of risk involved, and it's expensive. So we want to essentially come to the table with proven widgets that work. Customers don't want to hire us to build a lot of infrastructure or plumbing code. We want to take things like CRM and Nintex, AvePoint, snap those into SharePoint like a complex set of Legos, and quickly deliver value for the customers. Another good reason that we're looking at build versus buy is we look back at some of the workflow automation projects we've done around SharePoint before we had these tools, and customers had spent upwards of $300,000. And looking back at some of those big contracts, well, today we could have done that for less than 50 if we had tools like this. And there's other scenarios where it's a much smaller number, like a $5,000 project instead of a $50,000 project. So the results may vary, but essentially it boils down to the time it takes a developer to build a workflow. If it takes you a week to do it with Nintex workflow versus 5 weeks to do a custom workflow, well, for us, if you hired us to do it, that's about a $24,000 reduction in fees. So that ROI becomes really compelling very, very fast. So that's kind of where we are, and that's why when we're talking about governance here going forward, we're going to point towards Nintex for Nintex reporting and Nintex workflow. Some of the examples that we've seen that are really getting traction with customers are from an infrastructure point of view. When you look at archiving and consolidating data, you want to fire off triggers based on maybe the age of the data that's out there, or maybe how long it's been since the data has been accessed, or level of activity of a customer with a lot of team sites, 20,000 employees, tremendous amount of team sites going on. We got a big problem with abandoned team sites. And the first problem is, okay, find them. Second is, okay, how long have they been abandoned, and then what are you going to do with them? How are we going to rectify that situation? There's notification issues that you want to talk about with governance. Newsletters letting people know, hey, most popular sites. Some of the real cool things, and actually I have a demo in this one, is automating very complex processes that involve user-level audit data and notification workflows. Let me take just a minute before I jump into some of these, the three demos that I'm going to do around governance. I want to recap for those of you that don't know what Nintex Workflow is. Nintex Workflow is a tool that lives inside of SharePoint. You basically draw the workflows. It's not just for programmers. There is no other tool to open up. It's an AJAX control that lives inside of SharePoint and lets you rapidly build workflows that live on top of Microsoft Windows Workflow Foundation. In the stack of where does Nintex fit versus Visual Studio and SharePoint Designer, it fits squarely in the middle. There's just a few instances where we would recommend using Visual Studio for very complex process-based workflows that are doing kind of high transaction levels, almost things that you're doing integrating with EDI through something like BizTalk or just massive bulk loads of data. You might need to open up Visual Studio for those. Everything else, Nintex is great. For those of you that don't know, there was a new version of Nintex Workflow and Nintex Reporting that came out, I think right at the end of the year. It was in December of 2009. In addition to new integration points between Nintex Workflow and Nintex Reporting, they built in a lot of new widgets and ways to get data into the workflows. It's for things like requesting data midstream or making a workflow kind of wait until those documents were actually submitted back into the workflow or put into a SharePoint list. So we got a lot more flexibility and power. There's also some better integration with Exchange. There were situations where customers needed to interact with someone's Exchange calendar or mailbox, and maybe they weren't in SharePoint. Maybe they weren't a SharePoint user at all. Maybe it was an executive that really just lived in their email inbox and used a BlackBerry. Well, now there's some cool tricks to hook into that data as well, straight from a Nintex workflow. Let me quickly talk about Nintex Reporting. The problem that we see with reporting is that there's a lot of reporting tools out there. We have another partner, AvePoint, has a fantastic reporting tool, but it's focused more on infrastructure and hardware and care and feeding in your SharePoint environment. The Nintex reporting tool is more focused on what's happening within SharePoint, who's using it, what are they doing, what documents are being accessed or shared, and what's happening, what kind of trends are going on over time. Out of the box, the Nintex workflow comes with 6 or 7 KPIs targeting kind of project management, business managers, knowledge managers. There's some IT and web and developer reports as well. In all, I think there's 50-plus reports that you can snap into on an individual basis, or you can aggregate them together throughout your SharePoint environment. I talked about a little bit of this. All the Nintex reports are using Microsoft Silverlight. Very configurable, highly customizable as well. It uses a data warehouse model where the data is aggregated kind of on an off-hours basis and put into a data warehouse so that when you run the reports, it's not hitting your SharePoint active data farm. Just a screenshot of just some Nintex reports here. All right, so here's the fun.